What actually happens if you invest $500 every month for 10 years? Most people imagine the answer starts with compound interest. But before the market earns a single dollar, there is a number that matters more. $500 a month, 12 months a year for 10 years. That means you personally contributed $60,000. No return assumptions, no market forecast, just you. So the real question isn't how big can $500 become? It's how much of the final result comes from you and how much comes from your money working for you. Let's use 3 hypothetical scenarios. At a 4% annual return, $500 invested every month for 10 years grows to roughly $73,350. These are hypothetical illustrations, not forecasts. Each assumes a constant annual total return, dividends reinvested before taxes and fees. Real markets don't move this cleanly, but the model lets us isolate the mechanism. At 7%, $85,500, and at 10%, just under $100,000. Now focus on the 7% example. After 10 years, your portfolio is worth about $85,500. But remember, you personally deposited $60,000 of that. Investment growth added about $25,500. Split the portfolio into 2 pieces. Your contributions, $60,000. Investment growth, about $25,500. Roughly 70% of the ending balance is still money you personally put there. Only about 30% came from growth. After an entire decade, you are still doing most of the work. And there is another detail hiding inside that $60,000. We talk about investing for 10 years as though every dollar had 10 years to grow. It didn't. Your first $500 contribution gets almost the entire decade. Your final $500 contribution barely gets started. Between them are another 118 contributions, all with different amounts of time to compound. So your portfolio is not really one pile of money growing for 10 years. It's more like 120 different deposits, each with a different age. The early dollars have years to accumulate returns on top of returns. The later dollars don't. Which means time doesn't just affect your portfolio, it affects every contribution differently. That's why the first phase looks so slow. You're not simply waiting for compounding, you're building the amount of capital that compounding eventually needs. Compounding needs something to compound, capital, and capital takes time to build. Now look again at our 10-year result, about $85,500. That number is much more interesting than it first appears. Because you are contributing $500 a month, that's $6,000 per year. At a 7% annual return, how large would a portfolio need to be for 7% of its value to equal roughly $6,000? About $85,700. After 10 years, our hypothetical portfolio sits at roughly $85,500. That's just below the threshold, but only barely. It crosses shortly after the 10-year mark. So around year 10, the relationship is beginning to change. Not because compounding suddenly becomes magical, but because the amount of capital you've accumulated has become large enough that its potential annual growth is approaching what you contribute during an entire year. For the first decade, you were doing most of the lifting. Now the portfolio is becoming large enough to start pulling at roughly your pace. That's crossover number 1, and it changes what the 10-year mark means. Year 10 isn't really the finish line, it's approximately where the second phase begins. But your portfolio approaching your yearly contribution is not the same as investment growth having done more work than you overall. After 10 years, you contributed $60,000. Growth added only about $25,500. So even near the first crossover, you still have a huge cumulative lead. That takes much longer to reverse. Keep the same hypothetical 7% return. Keep contributing $500 every month. At around 18 years and 8 months, the second crossover finally occurs. For the first time, the total growth the portfolio has produced becomes greater than everything you have personally contributed. Around year 20, you've contributed $120,000. The portfolio is worth roughly $254,000. More than half now comes from growth. And by year 30, you contributed $180,000. The portfolio is roughly $585,000. About 69% of it is now growth. Notice what happened. At year 10, roughly 70% came from you. By year 30, roughly 70% comes from growth. The relationship has almost completely reversed. Of course, smooth calculations hide real-world friction. Fees are one example. In a simplified version of our model, if ongoing costs reduce the effective return from 7% to 6%, the 10-year ending value falls from about $85,500 to roughly $81,200, a difference of more than $4,000. And the longer the timeline, the longer those missing dollars also lose the opportunity to compound. Now consider delay. Suppose you wait 5 years before beginning, then invest $500 per month for only the remaining 5 years of our 10-year window. Instead of roughly $85,500, you finish near $35,600. That's almost $50,000 less, but that gap isn't some mysterious punishment for waiting. A large part exists because you also contributed $30,000 less. The rest is growth. Those missing contributions never had the chance to earn. And then there is behavior. Skipping months, stopping when markets become uncomfortable. Each interruption doesn't just reduce the final balance, it pushes those crossover points further away. The machine can only grow from the capital that actually makes it inside. So what happens if you invest $500 every month for 10 years? You do not unlock a guaranteed return. You do not automatically become wealthy. And $500 itself isn't a magic number. The surprising part is what those first 10 years actually accomplish. In our 7% illustration, you contributed $60,000. The portfolio reached about $85,500. Most of it was still built by you. But around that same point, the capital you've accumulated becomes large enough that its potential annual growth begins approaching the $6,000 you're adding each year. That's crossover number 1. Then, if the same hypothetical conditions continued, around year 19, the total growth accumulated by the portfolio would finally overtake everything you had personally put in. That's crossover number 2. The first decade is mostly about building the capital. Around year 10, that capital becomes large enough to begin sharing the workload, and eventually it can carry more of it than you do. First you build the capital, then the capital begins to build with you.